a very good experience. It was an interesting talk, and many of the topics were touched that usually aren't talked about much in interviews. And I like that part. There was a good conversation on space, and I think that was an interesting topic, and there were things that I didn't know that I learned. It was overall a good experience, and many of the wide coverage of topics was taken from economy, from myself, from civil, by IFS or space or history. So I think it was overall a good experience.
Hello, Mr. Rishabh.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Shall we start?
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Rishabh, what is the meaning of your name, Rishabh?
So Rishabh stands for morality. It has other meanings also. It is also the second swar of Sargam. Rishabh also means bull.
So, do you think the civil servants need the quality of Rishabh? How do you justify?
So I think the qualities of the all the qualities associated with the name of Rishabhs are required in civil services. For instance, and first and foremost, morality. A civil servant leads the society. He has to administer, he has to manage many people, he has to implement the policies of the government. And as a leading figure in the society, he has to be moral. He has to set an example for other people to follow. And he has many powers and many responsibilities. So morality is very essential here, so that there is no misuse of his powers. Along with that, the characteristics of the name Vrishab, that leads to a bull. We can compare that to having courage, having determination, and not being boggled down by small difficulties. One should overcome them also. So that is also very relevant.
Do you think civil servants are currently, instead of an instrument of change, have become a victimization of change?
So I believe that civil servants, the steel frame of our democracy, are still the instruments of change, even though there might have been some instances here and there in the past that haven't been up to the conduct of a civil servant. However, such a generalization shouldn't be made. The civil servants still are the instruments and drivers of change. And like in every system, there are still scope for improvement, and we should work on those small aspects and not make blanket judgments.
What do you mean by the term civil services activism?
So it refers to a phenomena wherein civil servants go beyond their basic call for duty, and they go beyond their usual responsibilities and work towards the welfare of people. Even though that is not directly their mandate, they go out of their way and work towards the welfare of people. However, it can over it. There's a gray line between what's activism and what's overreach, and many times this line is forgotten. So there needs to be a balanced approach. However, some sort of activism is always welcome.
Can you explain me about the civil servant and the minister relationship?
So a civil servant is the permanent executive, whereas the minister is the political executive. And as per the law and constitution, a civil servant is accountable to the political executive, as the political executive is the one who has been elected by the people, who represents people. So there is always a relationship, and there's always a requirement for a healthy working relationship between the two, so as to implement and policies effectively, so that the civil servant can advise the minister with respect to formulation of policies, and even in other aspects also there is requirement for a harmonious relationship wherein both of them work as two pegs in a machine, as two wheels, and as long as they both work harmoniously, they'll both be able to fulfill the responsibilities justifiably.
You are given a situation. Say you are a civil servant, and obviously you have to work with as per the rule, but at the same time you have to work with your political boss. And if there is a lack of harmony between you and your political boss, how you will tackle with such a situation?
Sir, I believe the rules that are made for civil servants are at the end of the day only for the welfare of people and as per the ideals of the constitution. And the same goes for the rules that are meant for a minister or a political executive. So we can always come to harmony if both of them are following their rules. If there is some sort of a communication gap between the civil servant or the political executive, or they are not abiding by the rules, so there can be conversation dialogue between both of them. A civil servant can approach a minister and can suggest him that what the path he is pursuing on is not as per the constitution, is not as per the law, and that he should course correct, and it would be in his best interest. It would be is in his political as well as the executive interest that he course corrects and that he goes on to the right path. And after employing these skills of persuasion and using we can include many tools as well. We can consult other seniors to talk to the minister. We can talk to other ministers who can talk to a concerned minister. And there are many ways by which a rapprochement and a middle ground can be reached within the ambits of the rules.
Right. Basically, right answer. That means if you are a civil servant in a state, you will ultimately, if your minister doesn't agree with you, you will approach to the chief secretary of the state, and you should tell him the situation. And if you are in the center, accordingly, you have to apprise the situation to your boss. So that's a correct answer. Mr. Bishop, the number of times we use the term civil servants, and on occasions we use the term bureaucracy. Are they two the same term, or there is some difference?
So there's a difference. Bureaucracy is a broader term. Bureaucracy means a rules-based meritocratic service wherein people come in to make their. It's a career-based service wherein people come in and there's a fixed hierarchy and the work gets carried on. However, civil services is a specific part of bureaucracy. Apart from so there are other parts also. There's judicial services as well. There's a part of bureaucracy is also under the military as well. So civil services is that part of bureaucracy that deals with civil matters, that are those matters that are not included in the military as well as the judiciary.
Have you studied it, or you made it by yourself?
So this is what I have studied, that there are the definition of civil services. This is what I'm aware of.
The structure which is there for public welfare, the structure which gets their salary from Consolidated Fund of India, by theory that is a civil services. They are to serve the civilian. They are to serve the public. They are public servant. So it's a structural term. Over a period of time, certain civil servants grew a psychopathology that they are not servants, they are bureaucrats. That means they are the rulers. They are the officials who are there to rule. So bureaucracy is the psychopathology which may be found in civil services, which may not be found. the civil services of Japan, US may not have this much level of bureaucracy as the civil services of India, Pakistan are having. So civil services is a structural term, whereas a bureaucracy is a psychopathology. I hope you're getting the point.
Yes, sir.
In civil services, the basic motive is service. But in bureaucracy, bureau plus crazy. Bureau means office table. Crazy means ruler mindset. So in bureaucracy, the main punching point is as a ruler mindset. So they are just 180 degrees apart. Although sometimes these words are used as synonym. Mr. Rajab, is that any doubt in this?
So I'll read upon it more.
Right? So
Yes.
civil services is a broader term, it's a theoretical term, and in certain countries, certain cases, civil servant work as a civil servant. But in certain situations, civil services may behave as if they are not servants, they are the masters. In such case, it is known as they are known as bureaucrat, and such personnel are known as bureaucracy. So this is a psychopathology, and it has a negative connotation, whereas the civil services is having a positive connotation. So this is the basic difference. So Mr. Vrishabh, you want to become a civil servant or a bureaucrat?
I'd like to become a civil servant.
Good. So Mr. Vrishabh, tell me something about the Sikar district.
So Sikar is a district in Rajasthan, and it comes under the region of Shekhawati. It is famous for many of its forts like Sikar Fort, and much of the district is the economy of the district is largely rural, and it's based on agriculture. There's there's one major town of Sikar, and there are other small villages and small towns around the region. It is also coming up as an education hub, as after Kota. Many people have touted Sikar as the next hub of education in India. So its economy is diversifying. However, there are still strong linkages of culture of its rural roots and cultural practices, which can't be found in other nearby urban regions of Jaipur, for instance.
So, Mr. Rishabh, you just now in 2020 you finished your civil engineering through IIT Delhi. So, if you are given a chance in civil services, don't you think we will lose a very good civil engineer?
So I believe that the time I've spent in IIT Delhi in civil engineering, I've learned a lot of skills. I have gained knowledge, and I believe these skills I'll be able to use in civil services as well. And being an engineer, I think I'll have something extra to add in civil services, and I'll be more of an asset being a civil servant as compared to a civil engineer.
So, for 4 years you have learned the skill of the civil engineering, and now if you are asked to work as a civil servant, what are the qualities of a civil engineer will you apply in civil services?
So there are many qualities. Apart from the knowledge aspect, there are certain skills that a civil engineer has that are very relevant in administration and civil services as well. For instance, in civil services, in civil engineering, a very important factor is frugality. There are always concerns of cost and time overruns, and that is very relevant in civil services as well, because in policy implementation, in designing of schemes, there is a constraint of economics. In civil engineering, there's another important another important idea of factor of safety, wherein while designing structures, while building buildings, we always take an extra measure, an extra precaution while designing them. For instance, civil engineers design buildings that can survive earthquakes and tornadoes. Aerospace engineers don't design airplanes that can survive tornadoes. So we always have that extra precautious approach, and that is also very relevant in civil services. We should always be prepared for the worst. And thirdly, I believe in civil engineering, most of the projects are very large. There are many stakeholders. There's a contractor, there are structural engineers, there are construction laborers. There are many people involved. So a sense of teamwork, a sense of leadership is required in a civil engineer. And I think similarly in civil services also, a leadership and sense of teamwork is required, because the government machinery is complex. There are many stakeholders. So yeah, I think there are many parallels between both of them.
Now it's a good answer.
Thank you.
So, tell me something about Jaipur.
So Jaipur is the capital of Rajasthan, and it is the largest city of Rajasthan. It is famous for its architectural marvels, its forts. Uh, it also houses two of the UNESCO World Heritage sites in Amer Fort and Jantar Mantar. It is known for its food scene. Many people come to Jaipur for its street food. It is also part of the Golden Triangle of tourism, and Jaipur is also an up and coming education hub, and is also an up and coming IT hub that many people have. There have been many IT industries that have been opening in Jaipur. Jaipur is also one of the few cities of India that has a working and functioning metro at the moment. And it is believed that since it's also in the influence of the NCR region, it also gains benefits from that, and it also provides some sort of an alternative towards migration to NCR. So people are migrating to Jaipur because of its proximity, as well as its small. It's relatively a smaller town, so it's small town nature. Along with that, a rich history and culture.
Okay, good answer. So you seems to be a very brilliant scholar. You are an NTSC scholar. You are a Kishore Vigyanik, right?
Yes,
So a Kishore Vigyanik is given an opportunity to study in Indian Institute of Science.
yes, sir.
Why didn't you pursue that career?
Sir, I believe a career in research would have been an amazing opportunity, and the opportunity given by by the government under the KVPY scholarship was very benevolent. However, after my 12th class examinations, I scored good in JEE, and I was guided by my parents, by my seniors, that I should go for IT, and therein, even if in the future I'll have many options in career, and I can diversify my options, and it would be a more safe bet instead of jumping into research. So that was the main reason.
Tell me something about your hobbies.
So I'm interested in reading Calvin and Hobbes comic strips.
Hmm.
I'm also interested in weight training and traveling. I'm also an avid quizzer. These are largely my hobbies.
Name some places you have visited in last 1 year, last 2 years.
So recently, even this year in February, I visited Dubai, and I
Okay.
also visited Sanj Valley in Himachal Pradesh.
Okay. Okay. So tell me something, some specialty of Dubai which India can learn.
So there are many things that I found very unique in Dubai. And that is, if one ca- if one sees the rise of Dubai in the past 3 or 4 decades, it was merely a patch in the desert, and now it has risen to be a world city, a global hotspot for tourism. Many infrastructural marvels present in Dubai are top are are top notch and are state of the art in the whole world. So India can learn how to implement how to build infrastructure projects, how to carry on long-term perspective urban planning. Because, for instance, Dubai earlier was dependent on oil economy. However, it has successfully diversified its economy. Currently, it's a tourism hub, it's a shopping hub, and it has one another thing that India can learn is how to utilize its location. So Dubai currently is the largest transit airport. So most of the flights going from Asia to Europe, most of them stop at Dubai. And Dubai has developed its airports and its location in such a way that it exploits this opportunity. And India is also at the center at the tip of the Indian Ocean region. So India can also uh, aptly use its locational benefits. There are other aspects also that India can learn. Dubai is also known for its cleanliness. So many the solid waste management techniques that they employ there, we can employ here. There's a practice in Dubai that every day at around 2 to 4 a.m., the whole city is cleaned. There's a force of people, and there are many technological uh, advances that are used, and the whole city is cleaned every day regularly. So we can employ these aspects in a small pilot project basis, and then we can see how it turns out for India.
And can India something learn from the taxation system of Dubai?
So Dubai has a very low or minimal or negligible taxation. They don't have any income tax, and
Yeah.
they recently introduced VAT at 5%, and they didn't even have value-added taxes before that. However, I don't believe that India can employ that. Much of India's the revenue of the government is based on taxation system. India doesn't have the oil wealth that Dubai has. India has a large population. India has many developmental requirements that the government has to pursue. So I don't think that we can employ their taxation system in India. India's needs are unique, and I believe our taxes are uh, inclined and adjusted according to our needs.
Well, I mean, you justify the high taxation in India.
So I won't say that the taxation in India is very high. It is in the average medium level. For instance, in many European and Scandinavian countries, the taxes go up to 45% or even 50%. And however, we can, as has been the idea has been is being pursued in the past couple of years, that the corporate taxes are being reduced so that we can invite more foreign companies to invest in India to give a boost to our manufacturing sector. So I think in the corporate taxes aspect, we can make it more competitive, and we are moving towards that.
One of the highest taxation in the world belongs to basically the Scandinavian countries of Europe. So,
Yes.
but they also provide the health insurance, the after retirement insurance. So their taxation can be justified. But in India, the middle class, they share a good amount of taxation. But what kind of social privilege they get from the government? What do you think, Mr. Rishabh, about this?
So I think our taxation goes into many things. The creation and the maintenance of infrastructure, roads, electricity lines. These are all sourced by taxation, and we should not take it for granted. They are sourced from our money only. And along with that, there are many schemes that are for the welfare of people. We the For instance, the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. So many lakhs of families, more than 5 lakh families, have been covered under the scheme. I'm sorry, not 5 lakh. It's a very large number have been covered. So it's in the benefit of people. There are many schemes that are there are many schemes as well as subsidies that go towards people, and I think that taxes are very instrumental in the implementation of these schemes and subsidies. And as we can see in the last year, also in the exceptional cases of the pandemic, the government supported many people who lost their employment, who didn't have sources of food, and who didn't have LPG access, and many people who were widows or were senior citizens, were disabled. The government gave them money. So all of that is sourced from taxes. So yeah.
So, Mr. Rishabh, after the success of the PPP model, now government has to spend less in infrastructure. Now government can be more focused with the welfare. So, do India really require that much taxation, or now Indian government can gradually think about gradually reducing it?
So I think there's still a large scope and large demand for social development schemes and for social welfare. India is lacking in many aspects where the government can work. So, and apart from increasing taxes rate, our objective should be to expand the tax base of India. So currently, not even 5% of the people pay taxes. So we need to expand our tax bracket. We need to expand our tax to GDP ratio. We need to simplify our tax norms so that people, so that the economy is more formalized, so that we increase our tax revenues without increasing our tax rates. So I think this idea should be pursued. However, I believe there's still need for taxation, because in the Indian economy, there are so many developmental needs and our resources are so less. We are always crunched for funds. And I don't think in the near future there'll come a time that we'll have surplus of funds and we can pursue the idea of reducing or removing taxation. And there's still a lot of scope where developmental needs are required, and we need to pursue with the idea of taxation.
Mr. Rishabh, you said 5% Indian pay the taxes.
So that figure might have been wrong.
That is the only related with the income tax.
Yes, sir. The income taxes, indirect taxes are paid by.
Indirect taxes are paid by almost most of us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Rishabh, don't you think instead of burdening the middle class, government should tax on the big farmers? There are
Sir,
loopholes in taxation.
Sir, I agree with you that there is scope for reforms in taxation system, and the idea of progressive taxation is based on this principle that the poor and that the people who have less income should be taxed less, and the people who have higher income should be taxed more. However, there has been other ideas floated also that the taxation should also be wealth taxes, so that people who have huge amounts of wealth amassed, they should be taxed according to that. So there are many ideas that can be explored in this aspect, and even in corporations there are extra cesses and surcharges for companies who make profits of more than a certain limit. So there are some elements of taxing the rich and big firms. However, we can explore the idea of taxing them more and removing the burden from poor class. However, that can also have we should also consider that the negative effects it can have. If we tax the rich,
Yes.
the
More.
big firms more, there'll be less incentive for the firms to grow, and the firms would like to stay below the limit above which extra taxes are
Yes.
given. So that will in some instances it will constrain the growth of our private sector as well. That needs to be considered.
That may promote the tax havens.
Definitely, sir. That may promote the
Like
tax
India is
havens,
having
the
maximum
companies.
FDI from Mauritius, not from US. So if we
Yes, sir.
overtax the corporates, if we overtax, so that's why Mr. Trump has reduced the corporation tax. And further, if we tax more on corporation, there will be growth in the cryptocurrency.
Yes, sir. And we can also align our policies with the current debates that's going on with the minimum global corporate taxes. I think in the future we'll gain from that as well.
Tell me something about the global minimum corporation tax.
So recently, the G7 countries have agreed upon having a minimum global tax of 15%, and the idea is based that the race to the bottom of tax bracket should be stopped. Many countries have tax rates of 0.5%, 1%, and they invite most of the companies register themselves there, and they go to these tax havens, and there's a tax foregone. So the countries where they get their market, they get their demand from, those countries don't get the benefits of their tax benefits of their market, and those countries lose revenue. So therefore, this idea of having a global minimum corporate tax has been
So
explored.
what will be the impact of this tax on India?
So there can be multiple impacts, both on the positive and the negative side. Many countries are pushing for even a higher global tax, if more than 15%, to have it at 20%. With that, India tends to lose because India has only recently reduced its corporate tax for the new companies that are coming India to 15%, and its effective tax rate is at 22% or 25%. So India is looking towards inviting more companies to India with a reduced tax regime. Only recently, our tax rates have been equal or similar to Southeast Asian countries and other Asian countries. So I think we lose out on it if the tax bracket limit is very high. However, if it's at 15% or a bit lower, India will gain significantly because we'll get our the revenues that we had foregone because of the tax haven countries. We'll get that back, and it will be an economic boost for India.
In your preferences, instead of IS, your first preference is Indian Foreign Service. Can you tell me some 2 to 3 strong reasons for this option?
So there are multiple reasons, both on the professional and the personal front. Professional, firstly, I believe that the opportunity to represent India abroad, to shape India's foreign policies, to take part in it, to have a ringside view of India's growth in the global ladder. I think it would be a matter of honor, and I would like to be a part of that. Secondly, I believe that I'm also very interested in international relations and geopolitics. So I believe that this is somewhere I'll be able to pursue this interest. On a more personal front, when I was a child, my father was posted in the Embassy of India in Muscat for 3 years, and I believe the seeds of my interest in foreign Indian foreign service was sown then, germinating when I had to choose service preferences. I'm also interested in traveling, meeting new people, exploring new cultures. So I'll be able to pursue this interest in Indian foreign service as well.
So you are trying to enter in the civil services in that at this juncture when Mr. Modi is again and again he is hammering on the private sector growth of private sector and he is dubbing the civil servants and babus.
So, civil services, even though there have been calls to make public PSUs to become more privatized, to have more privatization in economy, civil services would always be necessary. It's an executive arm of the government, and it is the implementing arm as well. So I believe that in the future, civil services would be essential for the growth of a nation. However, what our honorable PM was hinting towards was that there are some need for reform. There are some needs for rationalization of civil services, which need to be undertaken. And he has also pointed out with the how he the word he used, babus, was for IAS officers mainly. So there has been some calls for reform in that aspect as well, with respect to the dominance of IAS in higher level posts of secretary. So many scholars have said that other services should also be given a preference. And I believe towards these civil services reforms and rationalization will make our civil services more efficient in the future. And it definitely is not the end of civil services. I'll say it's a new beginning.
No, good answer. In your answer, you mentioned about the privatization of the public sector undertaking. So, which is the ministry and which is the department involved in the disinvestment process, and where these proceeds go?
So the department is DIPAM, uh, this Department for Investment and Asset
And
Management. I'm
and
unable to
public
recall
asset
the.
management.
And Niti Aayog is also an important part of the process. It is the one who recognizes which PSUs should be disinvestment should take place. Once disinvestment takes place, the funds go to there's a corpus of there's a corpus fund wherein the funds go towards, and I'm unable to recall. I think it's National NIIF,
NIF, NIF, yeah.
NIF, wherein the funds go, and then there are some rules, that is the funds, the principal amount should not be used. Only the interest and the gained from the principal amount should be used towards other socio-economic development of the country.
Your last line, have you read somewhere? Principal should not be used.
Yes, I have read somewhere, even though it might have been changed in the recent past, but I've read this.
The principal is 3 by 4th of the sum received by NIF can be spent in the social schemes. When the process
I might have remembered wrong.
When the process of disinvestment began, government used to use this disinvestment for pumping the fiscal deficit, for reducing the fiscal deficit portion. So that's why these new rules have come. It should not be spent that way. It should be used, at least 3 by 4 should be used in the social schemes. So, anyway. So what is fiscal deficit, Mr. Rishabh?
So fiscal deficit is the difference in government's receipts and the borrowings, and removing from that debt creating capital receipts. If we remove borrowings, if we remove, then what's left is the fiscal deficit.
Pardon, please.
So so if we take it in a formula aspect, so fiscal deficit is the government's receipts minus borrowings, and from borrowings we have removed non-debt creating receipts, non-debt creating borrowings.
Let me simplify it. It is the total borrowing by the government in a financial year.
So that is also.
Because there will be no mistake in answering. No? It's equivalent to what is fiscal deficit. It is equal to the total borrowing. That means total expenditure minus total receipts of the government receipts. Without borrowing. Without borrowing. That means it is equal to the public.
Yes.
So, in what is the difference between the public? What is public borrowing? Explain.
So, public borrowing refers to the borrowing
in budgetary context. In budgetary context, I'm asking.
So, can I think for 10 seconds?
I'm asking about fiscal deficit related with the public borrowing. Public borrowing related with the fiscal deficit.
So it's the borrowing that is undertaken by the government, and it also includes borrowings from other PSUs. However, that part is not included in the fiscal deficit. So the borrowing that is directly undertaken by the government is included in fiscal deficit.
How the government borrows for the budget in fiscal deficit? What are the instruments?
So the government gets money from treasury bills and other market instruments through which government raises money.
Basically from treasury bills. So what is the difference between a fiscal deficit and a public borrowing of a government? Total public borrowing of a government.
Sir, I'm not very sure, but if I had to take a guess, I would say that in total public borrowings, if an organization of the government has borrowed from some place, for instance, if FCI has borrowed money, that would not be included in fiscal deficit.
Yeah.
The only the money directly borrowed by the government is included.
Whatever government borrows through treasury bills in a financial year, that is a fiscal deficit. So that is fiscal deficit for a year. It's a financial year. And the total borrowing, that is public debt, total public borrowing of the government is internal plus external over a period of time. Say till now. So this is the big difference.
Thank you, sir.
So you are interested in foreign relations. So tell me, in Asia, there are certain areas which government of India should concern with. I need 2 areas in Asia.
So I believe the first and foremost area should be South Asia, India and its immediate neighborhood. It is and should be always the primary concern of India. And second, if we include China if we don't include China, then the second would be China. And apart from that, the Central Asian region is very important.
How India should see the Chinese presence in Sri Lanka?
So China has been increasing its inroads in Sri Lanka, and there was recently the Sri Lankan Parliament passed the Colombo Port City Project bill, and with that, China has a freehold over a region in Colombo. It can implement its own laws, and in the past also China has has had a 99-year lease for the Hambantota port, and on the part of India, there was a joint project for the East Colombo Port Terminal with India and Japan, which was cancelled by the Sri Lankan government. So these are some worrying signs. However, we should also respect the idea that Sri Lanka is in need of economic and its own economic development, and it has a right as well as it's justified to gain finances and funds from anywhere it can, and we should not impose our will on them. However, we have been assured time and again by the president of Sri Lanka that India's security concerns and interests won't be compromised. And along with that, we can explore the ideas of more joint cooperation with Japan as well as more economic investment in Sri Lanka, so as to counter Chinese influence through economy, as well as we can also employ our uh, civilizational as well as soft power links with Sri Lanka to have some more leeway over China.
And how India can counter the Chinese presence in Pakistan?
So I believe this is a very complicated issue. It is not easy because China and Pakistan have had a very strong relationship for a long time, and recently, and they have relationships across various sectors, be it defense, be it infrastructure, and with the coming up of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, things have gotten even more complicated, and uh, India cannot directly deal with Chinese influence in Pakistan. Rather, what India can do is to prove to China and the world that Pakistan is not a good source for source for investments, because Pakistan, and it has tried to do that on international forums. It has cornered Pakistan's economy through FATF sanctions. It has cornered Pakistan from many of its allies. For instance, UAE and Saudi Arabia, they were the very strong allies of Pakistan. So we can use these international instruments. Along with that, the, directly India cannot compete with China and Pakistan because the India-Pakistan relationships are very hostile, and China sees Pakistan as a counterweight towards India. So we should keep these things in mind, and we can work on through diplomatic channels on international forums to pressurize Pakistan.
Tell me something about the Chabar port of India.
Sir, the Chabar port of India is planned in Iran on its coast, and there was a project that the Chabar port would be linked with through the Central Asian region as well as to Russia and Europe through the INSTC corridor as well as through the Zahedan Zaranj Dilaram highway. However, recently there have been some roadblocks in the project. Earlier, with the sanctions of the US government on Iran, along with that, the recently Iran has given the some of the project work of the railroad to China. So it is being seen that the project is in tough waters, and I think we need to increase our engagement with Iran, and we need to revamp this project so as to ensure our strategic as well as economic interest, because it would be an entry point for us into the markets of Central Asian region, and that is very important.
So was the Chabar port in the sanction list of US?
No, sir. Chabar was given an exemption from the sanctions list. However, for the project implementation, many companies were involved, many materials involved. So indirectly, it was difficult for India to pursue the project.
Tell me about the 1.5 track of diplomacy.
So track 1.5 is a mixture of track 1 and track 2 diplomacies, wherein both the formal channels as well as informal channels like academicians, like scholars, like researchers and students, they also take part. They also take part in diplomacy along with the officials of the government.
What are the current changes of United States related with India after the entry of Mr. Biden as head of the US government?
So although it's very early to say about the foreign policy of US with respect to India, broadly, the trajectory has been similar. President Biden has enforced engagement with India, has continued engagement with India, and has even given a strong statement by through the Quad summit of the leaders of the nations. So the engagement with India has continued on the strategic aspect with respect to China. On the more economic front and the on the uh, COVID aspect, US has been more receptive to world's needs, including India. With President Biden coming in, he has promised that 500 million vaccine doses would be given to other countries, including India. And in July itself, 80 million, June itself, 80 million vaccines would be given. And he has even supported the TRIPS waiver that was championed by India and South Africa and WTO, which was rejected by the earlier US administration. So I think there has been more inclination towards India and towards India's interest in all forums of be it political, be it strategic, be it economic, or be it diplomatic in international organizations.
What is the current Eagle Act related with the green card?
So I'm not exactly aware of this, but recently there have been some changes. That earlier the entry of certain sections of Indians into US was restricted, and there were more barriers. Those have been lifted. Those have been eased. For instance, now the people have a second chance to clarify their stance while giving applying for visas in US. So this has improved immigration of Indians to US, and it would increase the people-to-people linkages in the future as well.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
So previously there was a country-wise quota in immigration in United States. Through Eagle Act, this has been liberalized, so it will ease the Indians to get the US visa plus US green card later on. What
Thank you,
is
sir.
the
I'll
difference
read up more on it.
between a green card and a US citizenship? Is there a difference?
Sorry, sir, I couldn't hear you.
What is green card in terms of United States?
So I'm not exactly aware of this. Green card is usually referred to an immigrant who goes in US and then he receives citizenship of the country.
Immigration in US can be through different channels. A green card holder means a resident of US but not a citizen. Green card. A
Okay.
resident of US but not a citizen. He gets most of the right but not the right of voting because he's not a US citizen. A green card later on enables a resident of US to get the citizenship in US.
Thank you, sir.
So, Mr. Rishabh, currently our economy is not doing so well, but the share market is doing wonders. What can be the reasons for this?
So the share market has been increasing in the past couple of weeks and is booming. That is largely because the share market is foregoing the short-term interest for its long-term interest. It's a symbol of confidence that the markets have in India's economic recovery. Along with that, with high vaccination drive continuing, it is believed that in the future our economy would recover and rise significantly. And it is on this idea and this assumption that the share markets are booming.
1 minute.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
What are mutual funds?
Some mutual funds are a basket of various securities and instruments, wherein they people invest in certain asset management companies, and those companies invest in a diverse portfolio of shares and bonds and multiple instruments, so as to get uh, assured returns which are lower in risk. Along with that, they have the expertise to know where to invest funds, so they are believed to be more safe and to be more secure in the long term.
What is ETF and what is the difference between an ETF and a mutual fund?
So ETF is an exchange traded fund, and there are some differences that I can recall at the moment. That ETFs are, I'm not sure, but ETFs are traded throughout the day, whereas mutual funds are traded when the market closes in the day.
Correct.
And
Correct. That's the basic difference. And what is the difference between ETF and a share?
sir, an ETF is shouldn't isn't necessarily of one company. Many companies and many corporations, their shares are basically clubbed together, wherein a share it's only of one organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, very correct. So tell me the achievement of IIT Delhi in countering with the situation of COVID-19.
Sir, IIT Delhi has undertaken many steps to counter COVID-19. In the initial stages, in March, when there were supply shortages of things like sanitizers, IIT Delhi came to the forefront, and it provided it made its own sanitizers that were very cheap and provided to the people. IIT Delhi has is also credited for uh, the the cheapest COVID test of rupees 250, and it has that has helped in our progress towards fighting COVID. IIT Delhi, many of the startups of IIT Delhi have also the startups incubated by IIT Delhi have worked on this. There have been smart masks that have been made by Smart Textiles through the textile department of IIT Delhi. So on the entrepreneurship as well as the research part, IIT Delhi has helped in our fight against COVID.
There are different tests related to the COVID, like the antigen, like the antibody, like the RT-PCR. Now, what are these tests?
So there are multiple tests, as you rightly noted. So firstly is the RT-PCR test, wherein the antigen is tested, the antigen of the COVID virus. That is the one that's tested through reverse transcription, where so a sample is replicated multiple times, and then it's the markers of proteins of the virus, those are tested and detected to confirm the COVID-19 infection. In antibody test, it's not the virus or the antigen of the virus that's tested, it's the antibodies in the blood serum that are tested. So once a person is infected by a certain pathogen, the immune system responds and it produces antibody. So that antibody is tested and it confirms whether the person was exposed to COVID-19 virus. There are other tests like serology tests, wherein mass testing is done on the blood serum of people to get a rough idea of the COVID-19 virus. And all of these tests differ in their efficacy, differ in their costs, differ in their time that is undertaken, as well as the clinical expertise that is undertaken, and they are accordingly used.
What is sero test? Serological test?
So I'm not exactly aware of the details, but it is with respect to the blood serum from which the virus traces are detected, or the antibodies are detected. I'm not sure.
that tells about the presence of the antibodies in a group of population, so that one can know the timings of the, one can anticipate about the timings of the herd immunity.
Yes, sir.
In budgeting, have you heard about the zero-based budget?
Sorry, sir. Zero budget project.
Zero-based budget. What is zero-based budget?
So zero-based budget is one wherein after every year the calculations of the various aspects of budget are taken started from scratch, from zero, and you have to justify that uh, where you need or where. So there are no rollover. You have to complete the budget, the funds that are allocated to you. Those aren't rolled over. So it ensures that there's timely utilization of funds as well as completion.
So why it is known as zero-based?
So I'm not sure, but I think it's because every year it starts the budgeting of the fund requirement of say of certain department is put to zero, and then from zero it's added on. The funds of the previous years aren't rolled over.
So what about the fiscal deficit part? What about the repayment of debt part of the previous budget? Are they
Sir.
again zero in the budget?
So I'm not exactly sure. Sorry, I'll have to read up more on.
No issue. In zero-based budget, whatever the borrowing part of the previous budget, they are not zero. They are to be carried as it is. The government has to pay the X amount. They has to be carried. They have to carry that amount. It's not zero.
Thank you.
In banking, there is a term like Securitization Act. So what is that securitization?
So it is when the securities, when the collateral towards a loan, when it can be used to repay a loan that hasn't been the installments of which haven't been paid. So if it's an NPA or a dead asset, the securities of it can be used to repay part of that.
What is NPA?
So NPA refers to a non-performing asset, and it has different definitions. For instance, in agriculture, it is when a short crop the loan hasn't been given for 2 seasons, and for a long crop, it's for one year or 1 season, it hasn't been repaid. For other instances, for other aspects, it is when the loan the installment hasn't been repaid for more than 90 days, then it's called an NPA.
What is the difference between NPA and stressed assets?
So I'm not exactly able to recall the definition. However, stress assets is a broader term. It includes NPAs as well as other. I think special mention accounts are also included, as well as
Restructuring of loan, other parts.
restructured loans as well.
In inflation, sometimes government uses a word core information. Tell me something about the core information part. Core inflation.
So the core inflation, the basket that is used in calculating core inflation uses doesn't include the volatile components of the basket. For instance, the fuel and food. Apart from that, the items are given, and therefore it gives a more long-term view of the inflation of the economy.
In space, how many shuttles India are having?
So by shuttles, do I include satellites? Yeah.
Yeah. For launching of the satellite, how many shuttles we are having? Name some shuttles.
I'm not aware of the number, but India has had many shuttles, including many microsatellites as well. So major ones are Cartosat, Astrosat. We have
space shuttle. Question is space shuttle.
Okay. So, sir, with the Mangalyaan, we have our Mars orbiter mission, and the Chandrayaan also there was an orbiter that is still orbiting.
So let me make it easy for you. What is a space shuttle? And what is the difference between a space shuttle and a satellite launch vehicle?
A space shuttle and a satellite or satellite launch vehicle. I couldn't hear. Sorry.
A satellite launch vehicle is a vehicle which launches the satellite, the payload in the
Yes, sir.
orbit. That is a satellite launch vehicle. But satellite launch vehicle is not reusable.
Yes, sir.
Whereas a space shuttle is a very advanced satellite launch vehicle, which has a capacity to launch the payload. That is a satellite in the orbit, and it has a capacity to land back.
So I don't think India has
Yeah,
any.
India even doesn't have a single space shuttle. India has
So
a lot of
reusable.
number of, yeah, India doesn't have a reusable technology. So tell me something about the achievement of the SpaceX.
So SpaceX is the front runner in private space exploration and space projects, and it's led by Elon Musk. They have worked significant. They have had significant advances in the reusable satellite launch vehicles, and they have also been given. They recently won a bid of the U.S. government, and they launched a satellite together to the International Space Station.
They have landed
SpaceX has
satellite, or they have taken
launched.
payloads to the ISS.
So they have taken payloads to the International Space Station. Along with that, it has also made significant progress in launching very heavy payloads at significantly reasonable prices, and it has made a huge progress in that aspect as well.
What
And
is
the
the
company,
beauty of the space shuttle of SpaceX in comparison with NASA?
so I'm one thing difference I'm aware of is the payload. So the Falcon 9 heavy rockets can take huge amounts of payloads to the space as compared to the NASA
Cheaper
rockets,
also.
and it is
Cheaper
significantly
also.
cheaper also.
But one beauty is whatever NASA is having or whatever European Space Agency is having, they are having a technology like vertical uplift but horizontal landing. Vertical uplift and horizontal landing. And the SpaceX are even a step ahead. SpaceX rockets are having vertical lift as well as vertical landing.
Yes.
So this is the beauty they have added in the whole scenario. तो उनके जो लिफ्ट तो वर्टिकल होते ही हैं, लिफ्ट तो होते ही हैं, बट उनकी जो लैंडिंग है वो भी वर्टिकल करा रहे हैं, तो उससे जो जो एक्सीडेंटल चांसेस हैं और कम हो रहे हैं. दिस इज द ब्यूटी व्हाट इज इट. Do you think Elon Musk is going to be another Harshad Mehta for cryptocurrency?
So I don't think so, because cryptocurrency, the very idea behind cryptocurrency, that it's a decentralized platform wherein one cannot directly game the system, one cannot collude with other people, one cannot hoard stocks or hoard certain instruments. So, however, the Elon Musk does have a huge influence on the cryptocurrency rates currently. With with his single tweets, the prices go up and down by 30, even 40 percentages. So he does have an influence, but I don't think in the long term it will continue. And many people have had a similar influence in the past. The lead many investment banks like JP Morgan, their heads have also changed prices. So I think it is in the innate nature of the cryptocurrency, because it is in its infancy, and it is only growing at the, it hasn't been it has only been 12 years since it has originated. So I think it is still evolving, but once it matures, people won't be able to spike the prices up and down so easily like Elon Musk does these days.
Mr. Rishabh, do you think people are trying to evade the taxes with the help of the cryptocurrency?
So it is one of the reasons that many people are going towards cryptocurrency. Along with that, many of the illegal money that people earn, as well as in many illegal activities like sales of arms, as well as ransom, it's paid in cryptocurrency because it's not traceable and it is not in the formal economic net of the governments. So therefore, it is used for these nefarious purposes as well.
In history, name any ruler who is proved to be a game changer.
So many rulers have been. If I had to choose one, Chandragupta Maurya is one who dethroned the Nanda king from a huge Nanda empire, and he established his own kingdom of the Maurya dynasty, and even expanded it. It improved the governance, improved the lives of the people. I think that is, and he also established the largest kingdom almost all over the world at that time. So that is a huge influence.
And in national movement, any national movement of your choice.
Sorry, sir. Any national movement?
Any national movement of your choice.
So I have to choose a national movement.
You have to choose a national movement. Then I'll ask questions.
So the Indian national movement.
Any national movement. You pick up any national movement.
So I haven't read much about other national movements.
Only like Quit India movement or non-cooperation movement.
Okay.
Any national movement of your choice.
So the Quit India movement.
Quit India. So what are the new colors added by Quit India movement in the spectrum of Indian nationalism?
So there were many new aspects to this movement which weren't seen beforehand. One of the major is that it was largely a leaderless movement. Much of the leadership of the Congress as well as Mahatma Gandhi, they were imprisoned before the movement could grow large. In spite of that, many people rose up, many small leaders who banded together, and they led the movement. Along with that, there was a mass participation of women and various other lower classes as well, and farmers. So there was a widespread participation, and it was one of the last nails in the coffin of the British Empire in India, because they realized that they can't hold India much longer, and therefore it more or less ensured that the freedom of India, even though it might take some time, but it will definitely happen soon.
Point number one, that instead of saying Quit India movement, a leaderless movement, we can call it a movement where masses are the leaders.
Yes, sir.
Masses are the leaders. Number two, this is the movement in which for the first time we didn't ask anything from the British, rather we ordered British to quit India. Number one, the masses are the leaders. Number two, we didn't beg anything. We straight away said, British, you quit India. यानी हमने आदेश ही दे दिया था हमको. Number three, the role of the parallel government. This is the first movement in which in number of places we establish our own Indian government. That the geographical area may be less. Number three, parallel government, our Indian government. Number four, this is the first movement in which we use our radio frequency for the cause of spread of the nationalism. So these are some new dimensions which were seen in the Quit India movement.
Yes.
Right, Mr. Bishop?
Thank you. Yes.
So your mock civil services interview is over. You have certain more queries, you can ask me.
No, I don't have any queries.
आपका कब डेट कब है इंटरव्यू की?
20 अगस्त.
काफी टाइम है. आपकी भी काफी बहुत अच्छी तैयारी है, और जहां आपको थोड़ा सा डाउट हो तो आप पूछ लीजिए कि सर मे आई टेक ए चांस, जहां थोड़ा डाउट हो। उसके बाद अगर वो परमिट कर दे चांस तो फिर चांस ले लेना, फिर वो गलत भी हो जाए तो चल जाएगा। बाकी तो हर चीज आपकी बहुत अच्छी है, कुछ आपको पर्सनल कुछ लेवल पे मेरे से डिस्कस करना हो तो कर लो।
सर जो क्वेश्चन वाज आस्क्ड स्ट्रॉन्ग रीजंस फॉर आईएफएस, सो वो वरी जस्टिफाइड और
जस्टिफाइड,
I need to change?
जस्टिफाइड।
Okay. So I had one more question that in my previous mocks I've been told is that I usually in some answers I go on for too long and I speak and I should need to restrict my answers a bit. Was that an issue? I tried to
नहीं
work on
मेरे
it
को
a
नहीं
bit.
लगता, नहीं मेरे को नहीं लगता, मेरे को लगता प्रॉपर बात कर रहे हो। आई डोंट थिंक, हो सकता है उस समय कोई ऐसा क्वेश्चन हुआ हो सकता है, मे बी, मैं उनको गलत नहीं ठहरा रहा, बट वट एवर इन लास्ट 70 minutes वट एवर आई हैव आस्क्ड, I didn't find any answer to be overstretched from your part. You are to the point. Yes, I will caution you not to take leverage in those parts where you have certain doubts. Before,
Yes.
you can say, sir, may I, if you allow me. So I'm not sure, but that way. Otherwise, it's fine.
Thank you, sir. I don't have any other queries.
That's from my side. Best of luck to you. All the best. Keep in touch.